Coming up, it's one of the most tragic tales of the rock era. A lead singer fronting a band that would become one of the most revered in history, completely cracked under the pressure. Whether it was due to excessive drug abuse, a pre-existing mental illness, or psychological strain, it's not entirely clear. There's been a lot of speculation. However, the fact remains that once his brain burned out, he became a detriment to the band, unfortunately. And he was ousted soon after, but his memory would haunt the band ever after and cast a shadow over some of their greatest work. Today, we're taking a deep dive into a classic rock standard that was inspired by these events and concluded arguably the greatest rock album in history. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you remember vegging out on the couch watching MTV for hours upon hours on end, back in the day, this channel is especially for you. Make sure that you subscribe below right now, click the big red button. You'll get the latest interviews and videos of History of Rock. Also, take a gander at our Patreon. We have full interviews and extra content there that you won't find anywhere else. So today we're getting into the story behind Pink Floyd's original frontman, Syd Barrett, and a classic rock staple that was inspired by his story, Brain Damage, from the Dark Side of the Moon. I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. The character of Syd Barrett and the subject of madness loom large over Pink Floyd, over arguably their greatest work, and for good reason. I mean, Syd was, of course, one of the band's founding members, their original frontman, and the primary songwriter for their brilliant early work. His time at the helm of Pink Floyd has often been described as a tragic descent into madness. How did it get to that point? Let's talk about that. Pink Floyd started off on a roll with their first two singles in March of '67. They released Arnold Layne. That reached number 20 on the UK charts. And then a few months later in June, they released See Emily Play. That climbed to number 6. Pink Floyd then followed up See Emily Play with their debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn. That was on August 4th of 1967. Largely written by Syd Barrett, the record combined childlike fantasy with psychedelic experimentation. But between Piper and the release of their second album, Saucer Full of Secrets, in June of '68, the band's narrative would take a turn into the bizarre and even heartbreaking, permanently altering the band's trajectory from there, all thanks to one Syd Barrett. While Pink Floyd's early chart victories led to more prestigious tours and greater exposure, this wasn't entirely a good thing. The pressures of success weighed heavily on Barrett's already fragile mind, and routine indulgence in hallucinogenic drugs only complicated matters. As a result of the ever-increasing pressure and hard-hitting drug abuse, Syd Barrett often appeared near comatose on stage and really incoherent with interviewers at the time. Several important performances had to be canceled and, letters of apology written. And the band was compelled to take a break. Bassist Roger Waters recalled, "It actually happened very fast with Syd. I have to say, right around the time of See Emily Play, he got very weird, very quickly." Syd's behavior then became even more erratic during a stretch of performances in the US and the Jimi Hendrix UK package tour, which they were involved in. As Nick Mason remembered it, this is when Syd went completely mad. Most of the time, he didn't know where he was. Mason remembered that while they were on stage playing a show, Syd detuned all the strings on his guitar and just stood there, staring straight out into space, into nothingness. Said Mason, "It was a bit weird, even for us. This kind of erratic behavior was also very difficult for the group to play along with and put Pink Floyd in an impossible situation. It got to the point where no one wanted to book them. And the gigs were all empty because the shows were getting so bad. No live shows meant no cash flow, and the money dried up pretty fast. Pink Floyd's leader figure was falling apart, and he was taking the rest of the band down with him. Now, in early December 1967, Nick Mason approached guitarist David Gilmour, whom the band knew from prior gigs. Said Gilmour, Nick sidled up to me and told me things were getting pretty desperate. I was to keep it under my hat, but they were thinking of making some sort of change. Would I be interested? Gilmour, of course, was. So the guy started to put together a plan. The idea was to use Syd's compositional skills for studio work and Gilmour's guitar to bolster the band in concert. Very similar to what happened with Brian Wilson, where he stayed home with the studio and the band went on tour. Later that month, Pink Floyd was booked to play The Christmas on Earth Continued, spectacular in London. It's a massive stage with a huge packed auditorium. The other performers that were on that were Jimi Hendrix Experience. There was also the Animals and Traffic. But when it was time for Pink Floyd to take the stage, Syd was nowhere to be found. Now, eventually, he was discovered in the dressing room, completely catatonic. Roger Waters managed to get Barrett on his feet and onto the stage. The band put Syd's white Stratocaster around his neck, and he started to play, at least the band did. And, I kind of hoped that he would join in when hearing the music, but Syd just stood there, tripping out of his mind. After going on like this for a few short numbers, the band fled the stage in a panic with Barrett in tow. And when the promoter realized that Pink Floyd was not going to finish their set, he went into a rage. By this time, though, the guys had loaded Barrett up in the car for a quick getaway. They had their paycheck in hand. In the aftermath of this debacle, though, Pink Floyd hired David Gilmour on full-time. Syd's last rehearsal with the band, according to record, was on January 25th, 1968. After trying a handful of gigs as a five-piece, the band decided to cut ties with Barrett. Actually, they were on their way to a show at the time, and they called out, somebody asked, should we pick up Syd? And someone else said, nah, let's not bother. And that was the unceremonious end of Pink Floyd's Syd Barrett era. This has been in 3 or 4 of the books that I've read by great Pink Floyd authors. I've had some people argue with me in the past that this is not what happened. There are a few different stories there, but to the best of my research ability, what I found is, they just didn't pick him up for the gig. Waters would later say, very sad about Syd. I wasn't for years. For years, I suppose he was a threat because of all the bollocks written about him and us. Of course, he was very important, and the band would never have started without him because he was writing all the material. It couldn't have happened without him. But on the other hand, it couldn't have gone on with him. Great way to say it. Fast forward 7 albums later, in the space of 5 years, and Pink Floyd was on the precipice of rock immortality. The Dark Side of the Moon. It's widely regarded as the most accomplished and complete concept album of the rock era. Now, as we break down this element of this classic record, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the glasses that I wear all the time. Zenni has sold 50 million pairs of glasses and have been rated as the highest customer service in the industry for its 5th year in a row. Speaking of Dark Side of the Moon, that's pretty awesome, 50 million. Just go download the app or go to our link below to get your glasses today. Check it out.
The lunatic is on the grass.
So Dark Side was what Pink Floyd had been working on, working up to since the release of A Saucer Full of Secrets. It's the record where both Roger Waters and David Gilmour thrived together, striking a perfect balance between Gilmour's musical genius and Roger Waters' superior lyrical skill, both geniuses in my opinion. It was released on March 24th, 1973. The Dark Side of the Moon had been in the works since December of 1971, actually. This is when Floyd began rehearsing a suite of songs for a British tour the next year. Booking a rehearsal studio in North London, they convened for daily jam sessions. And one afternoon, they were sitting in Nick Mason's kitchen. And we've talked a little bit about this with other songs, but Roger Waters announced to the band that he had a theme in mind for this. We thought we could do a whole thing about the pressures we personally feel that drive one over the top. The pressure of earning a lot of money, the time thing, time flying by very fast, organized power structures like the church or politics, violence, aggression.
Blade, you make the change.
It talks about the illusion of working towards ends which might turn out to be fool's gold. Now, within 6 weeks, the basic outline was complete.
There's someone in my head, but it's not me.
The project at the time took on the working title of Eclipse, a piece for assorted lunatics. The suite made its debut on the first date of the world tour beginning on February 17th, 1972 at the Rainbow Theatre in London. Recording began a few months later on June 1st, the day after that particular tour was finished. Most of it was done in Studio 2 at Abbey Road with legendary engineer Alan Parsons. Floyd had the album sequenced very early on, roughly following the order of the Eclipse show. The Dark Side of the Moon was recorded over the space of about 9 months, taking about 40 or so sessions to complete. Even before Pink Floyd officially started work on The Dark Side of the Moon, Roger Waters had already written the song Brain Damage, which is what we're going to cover today. The words and music originated during the closing stages of recording Metal. Originally titled The Dark Side of the Moon, the band performed the song under that name within the framework of the concept Eclipse, a piece for assorted lunatics.
The lunatics are in my home.
Later during the Dark Side recording sessions, the initial bass track was laid down under the title Eclipse Parts 5 and 6. As the album neared completion in October and November of 1972, the piece was then renamed Lunatic Song, before ultimately landing on Brain Damage. I love these stories about what they were called before. It gives a lot of insight into their thinking. This song is, of course, a thinly veiled reference to Syd Barrett, one of Waters' early attempts to reflect on the original frontman's departure from the group. Certainly wouldn't be the last. Said Waters about Brain Damage, there was a residue of Syd in all of this. It was pretty much recent history. Syd had been the central creative force in those early days. And so his having succumbed to schizophrenia was an enormous blow. Brain Damage is about the sense that one is not necessarily the master of one's own identity, that we're all marionettes and the strings of our lives are pulled by our history, our backgrounds, our parents, our ancestors, and so on and so forth. End of quote. Great quote there. But as Waters points out, Brain Damage is not only a song about Syd Barrett, it's a song about the rest of us as well. It contains a universal warning about how given the right, or should I say wrong, combination of events, any one of us could go mad. Roger Waters admitted that at times he felt he was on the verge of madness himself. He recounted one instance that occurred when he was in the canteen at Abbey Road. He was there sitting at a table with everybody else. Suddenly, as he put it, there was no pain. Everything, the table, all the people at it, they began receding. The sound became tinny and the room shrunk as if he was looking at something through the wrong end of a pair of binoculars. Waters thought to himself, whoa, hold on a minute. I'm not taking any drugs or anything. This must be what it's like to go mad. In response, Waters got up from that table, walked up to the stairs of the studio, and started playing the piano. And slowly everything began to turn to a more normal perspective. Nothing like that had ever happened to him and never happened again after that. Waters was sure it was the beginning of a potential breakdown.
The lunatic is on the grass.
The lyrics of Brain Damage open with the repeated lines, "The lunatic is on the grass."
The lunatic is on the grass.
Waters explained that these words evoke a specific place in his mind from back when he was growing up. He said, in the first verse of Brain Damage, the grass that I talk about in the square of grass between King's College Chapel and the river, I can see it in my mind very vividly.
Games and daisy chains and laughs.
As with many of the city's gardens, this one had long been partitioned from the public by keep off the grass signs. Waters plays on this image, and in just 6 words, he gives us a sly and poignant sermon about societal expectations, and what becomes of those who dare to defy them. The implication here is that only someone who is not their right mind would ever question society's norms. So anyone standing on the grass must clearly be a lunatic. And just as Waters sings, we got to keep the loonies on the path, that is, off the grass.
Got to keep the loonies on the path.
As Brain Damage progresses, it's clear that the lunatics are not only found on the grass and the paths, nor are they confined to the first stanza. In the second verse, first one lunatic, then multiple make their way into the hall, and then later on, Waters discovers that the lunatic is in fact in his head.
Lunatic is in my head.
In some incredibly provocative and haunting lyric craft, Roger Waters describes what is to become of him, now that he is losing his mind. You raise the blade, you make the change, you rearrange me till I'm sane.
You raise the blade, you make...
It's a chilling reference to going under the knife for a lobotomy. The insinuation is that this is how society deals with those who do not conform to its standards. Free thinkers, beware. Your deviant thoughts are not welcome. The solution is to rearrange your brain until you are sane.
You rearrange me till I'm sane.
And the next lines mirror these thoughts. You lock the door and throw away the key, and there's someone in my head, but it's not me.
There's someone in my head, but it's not me.
Brain Damage is filled with so much striking imagery, some of which after hearing you can't help but think of Syd Barrett.
The dam breaks open many years too soon.
A dam breaking open many years too soon, a head exploding with dark forebodings, and of course,
The band you're in starts playing different tunes.
these lyrics are reminiscent of Barrett's penchant for playing the wrong song on stage. Or maybe in Syd's head, it was his bandmates who were playing the wrong songs. And then there's the iconic line, I'll see you on the dark side of the moon. Waters said the line is me speaking to the listener saying, I know you have these bad feelings and impulses because I do too. And one of the ways I can make direct contact with you is to share the fact that I feel bad sometimes. End of quote.
I'll see you on the dark side of the moon.
It is a hopeful rendezvous. It's good to know that, we're not alone. As sort of an extra way to punctuate the emotion of the song, Pink Floyd included the voice of their road manager, Peter Watts, throughout this piece. First, he can be heard laughing at about 1 minute and 52 seconds.
The lunatic.
And then at 3 minutes and 20 seconds, he says, I can't think of anything to say. And finally, just before the song transitions into Eclipse, he says the words, I think it's nice, and laughs. Speaking of Eclipse, it is of course forever linked to Brain Damage, but not just by proximity. Rather, Eclipse intuitively flows out of Brain Damage, both musically and thematically. Whereas Brain Damage is the result of all life's pressures, building up before it, Eclipse acts as a summation to the album itself.
Are you distressed? Are you saved?
It is the final curtain closing on this brilliant opus about the pathway to madness. As the dark side of the moon draws to a close, we're left to wonder and reflect. What does this mean to us? Mean for us? All that we touch, all that we see, all that we taste, all that we feel. Everything we experience, or as Roger Waters puts it, everything under the sun. It's all eclipsed by the moon. Whether you interpret this transition of light into darkness as life fading into death, sanity giving way to lunacy, or from some other perspective. Keep in mind that the sun is still there, and that barren rock in the sky, though it might hide the sun from our view, it cannot obscure its light forever. Or in other words, there's always hope.
I'll see you on the dark side of the moon.
Over the years, Brain Damage has appeared in a few movies and TV shows. Actually, far too few. I was pretty surprised when I looked this up. The short list includes Life, The Universe, and Douglas Adams, Yu-Gi-Oh!, the Abridged series, and Westworld.
Breaks open many years too soon.
It's also been covered by Dream Theater.
Every day, the paper boy brings more.
The London Philharmonic Orchestra, Eddie Vedder did it. Flaming Lips, Jerry Cantrell. Also Jefferson Starship, and then Fish did a version of it. Brain Damage has, of course, along with its other Dark Side counterparts, meant so much to so many since its release. It is a powerful, thought-provoking song that causes you to not only examine yourself and your own mental state, but to also consider the plight of others and hopefully approach them with a desire to understand them, knowing that all of us have damage to deal with in our lifetimes. Brain Damage is one of the most compelling parts of one of music's greatest albums. Along with Eclipse, it's the most fantastic ending of an opus that one could ever plan on an album that has so many urban legends behind it. It's so mysterious and otherworldly. It feels like aliens made it, yet it was made by a bunch of kids. I mean, they were all in their 20s if you think about it. That's just mind-blowing.
The lunatic is in my head.
This is an album that sold so many copies. There were rumors that there was one or two record factories that only made Dark Side of the Moon for years, and they still couldn't keep up with demand. I brought that up with the album's legendary engineer, Alan Parsons, and he commented on it. I'll show you that in just a second. It spent 18 years on the charts, and it only went to number one for 1 week in the US, and it never hit number one in Britain. When Roger Waters played some of this for his wife at the time, she was hysterical. She cried. It had that kind of effect on a lot of people. And then there's the Wizard of Oz connection. I'll let Alan Parsons comment on that for the end here. Let's talk about Dark Side of the Moon for a second. I mean, as an album, it's a mammoth. It spent 741 weeks on the charts, which is a record. It sold 30 million copies. There used to be a legend. I don't know if this is true because I've never been able to find the actual fact that there was one factory in some place that all they did was make Dark Side of the Moon.
I can believe that. Especially at Christmas, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. Have you ever attempted the whole Dark Side of the Moon, Wizard of Oz thing?
I did a talk in Seattle with Bob Ezrin, who obviously has other Pink Floyd connections. We talked about, just like you and I are talking now, we talked about Pink Floyd and making albums and stuff. And then the moderator said, we have time for one more question. And the guy stood up and said, so what do you think about this connection between the Wizard of Oz and Dark Side of the Moon? And Bob Ezrin said, that cannot be the last question. Because it has absolutely no foundation.
Oh, I know.
It was a fabrication by someone who had much too much time on his hands.
Much too much time on their hands. Like the Paul is Dead fabrication of the Beatles.
Of course, yeah.
But it's fun. It's fun little pop culture.
You know what? I love watching TV with the wrong soundtrack.
Yeah.
Music can be music, or my TV system here at home. I can be watching one channel and listening to the sound of another channel, and it's things always happen. I mean, inevitably. Yeah. It's great to watch a really serious movie with a comedy soundtrack, and
the laugh track,
right. And light-hearted music in a really sort of heavy horror film and stuff. It's fun, but no, there is no
connection.
We didn't have VCRs back then.
Right?
How could we have done it?
Coincidentally, it's just a total coincidence. Thanks for watching. Leave us a comment about Pink Floyd and Brain Damage and Eclipse. And what are your memories of the Dark Side of the Moon? These songs in particular. Is it the greatest album of all time? Let us know in the comments below. Let's have a great discussion. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to check out the rest of our extensive catalog on Pink Floyd's installments. Don't forget to subscribe below so you never miss out on our daily videos. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Celebrate the greatest in rock and roll. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.